On a summer's evening in London, a crowd is gathering for an unusual cinematic experience. This is the Kennington Bioscope, a unique monthly event that takes place in the historic Old Lambeth Workhouse, where Charlie Chaplin lived and worked before he went on to become cinema's first international superstar. It is now the location of the Cinema Museum. The Bioscope gives its audience the chance to travel back to a time before multiplex cinemas, IMAX, 3D and ear-splitting surround sound, to experience long-forgotten silent films shown with live piano accompaniment, just as they would have been enjoyed 100 years ago. John Sweeney is a world-renowned silent film accompanist, co-founder of the event, and expert on the silent film era.
Well, the characteristic of silent film is that there is no real sound on the picture. You might have a soundtrack put on it at some point, either at the time or later, but there is no real sound. You don't have the sound of talking, you don't have the sound of dogs barking or doors closing or cars revving up or anything like that.
Of course, calling it silent film is a misnomer. Right from the beginning of cinema in 1895, people used music to fill the gaps left by not having real sound.
By the 20s, quite often productions would have a score which was written. If it was a particularly big budget sort of production number, they would have commissioned a score, which they would possibly expect to be played everywhere, but whether it was, I don't know. Other times, the musical director of the production company would produce what's known as cue sheets, which is a list of popular tunes or tunes from big books of music for silent film. And they would say, play for this scene, play this number, for this scene, play another piece, and so on and so on. There are some people who think you should watch silent film in silence to get the pure cinematic experience, which is all very well, except the vast majority of silent films, in my opinion, don't work in silence. And certainly the vast majority of silent films were never made to be seen in silence. The directors didn't expect them to be seen in silence either. So there is a space for the music. The music is essential. And it's very interesting with someone like Alfred Hitchcock, whose 9 surviving silent films have recently been restored beautifully by the British Film Institute. If you look at his silent films, and then you look at the sound films, you can see that he grew up being a silent film director, because there are so many scenes in Hitchcock which aren't about dialogue at all, and where the music, there's action happening and the music is happening. Or in the case of, for example, the crop duster scene in North by Northwest, there isn't even any music. You have a real sound, but there's no dialogue. And you can see that he grew up making film by image. I mean, he said, "Show, don't tell." That was one of his catchphrases.
The release of the first official talking picture, The Jazz Singer, in 1927, signalled the beginning of the end of the silent film era. Hollywood only continued making silent films for another couple of years, but in other countries the tradition persisted.
In other countries, though, in Japan, for example, they were making silent films as late as 1935-36, and also in Russia. So it varies, but basically the end of the 20s was the end of the silent era. So when talkies came in, it took a while for all the cinemas to switch over to sound, but the writing was on the wall for silent film. I can't remember the figure, but I think at least 2/3 of the films made in the silent era were lost, either through neglect, because when sound came in, people thought nobody would be interested anymore. Silent films were also made on a film stock made out of silver nitrate, so they were often boiled up to get the silver content. And the film was fragile, so lots of films had just decayed.